with bill request. I don't think there will be any objection from the senators not here, but I'd like to get these off the table. Brad, would you like to make the request?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Brad Smoot, representing Net Choice. I'd request a bill, revisor number 24 RS 3383. It deals with data centers and a sales tax exemption.
Thank you. Committee, any questions? Any objection? We'll make the request. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yes, and committee, I do have a request. It's RS 3420, dealing with 340B reimbursement rates. Are there any questions? Any objection? Seeing none, we'll make the request. Thank you, committee. Our first item up on the agenda is, well, second item, sorry, is the hearing for Senate Bill 515. Amelia, will you give us an overview?
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Senate Bill number 515 would amend 793606 to provide a sales tax exemption for all sales of tangible personal property and services, including the renting and leasing of tangible personal property purchased by the Dane G. Hansen Foundation, which is a charitable organization exempt from federal income tax under 501c3. And which such property would be used for the foundation's charitable initiatives, programs, and grants, including but not limited to the Logan Intergenerational Family Education Center, an intergenerational campus located on real property currently owned by USD 326 in Logan, Kansas. The bill would also provide that exemption for contractors who are constructing or remodeling facilities for such organization, and the bill would take effect from and after publication in the statute book.
Thank you, Amelia. Committee, any questions? Seeing none, thank you. Our first conferee is Eric Parkhurst via WebEx. Welcome, Eric.
Hi, thank you. My name is Eric Parkhurst. I'm an attorney with the Beaver Dye Law Firm, and we represent the Dane G. Hansen Foundation and are in support of this bill, specifically with respect to the Logan Intergenerational Project, or commonly referred to as the LIFE Project. As noted in my written testimony, this is a project where they are constructing a K through fourth grade facility and a assisted living facility that's operated by the Logan Manor, which is a component of the city of Logan, into one facility for the purpose of having a combination of children and the residents of the Logan Manor under one roof for shared resources such as cafeteria, recreational space, a community fitness center, and other forms of community benefit for this facility. Because of the nature of the project, have already incurred roughly $397,000 of sales tax and expect to incur another $140,000 of sales tax when the construction project really is for the benefit of the school district and the Logan Manor, which are both tax exempt entities. So we're in support of an exemption that would exempt that remaining sales tax that would be paid, but also for future projects such as this, where the Hansen Foundation is investing in these types of projects and grant programs in Northwest Kansas.
Thank you. Committee, do you have any questions? Seeing none, I'm very familiar with the Dane Hansen work that you guys do. The information that you send out, the scholarships, it's just amazing what you do for Northwest Kansas. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you for letting me speak.
Is there any other proponents? Any opponents? Any neutral? We do have written by Spencer Duncan, neutral testimony. Committee, I draw your attention to that. Committee, I'm going to close the hearing on Senate Bill 515. and open the hearing on Senate Bill 509. Amelia, will you give us an overview?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Senate Bill number 509 relates to income tax and would establish an education opportunity tax credit commencing with tax year 2024 for resident individual taxpayers with eligible dependent children not enrolled in public school. The educational opportunity tax credit would be in an amount equal to either 75% of the amount of base aid for each dependent child enrolled during the tax year in a private school accredited by the State Board of Education or a regional or national accrediting agency, or in an amount of 50% of the amount of base aid for each dependent child enrolled during the tax year in a non-accredited private school, if such dependent child was eligible to enroll in kindergarten or grades 1 through 12 in a Kansas public school but was not so enrolled. The tax credit would be a refundable credit, and the taxpayer would be required to provide a valid Social Security number for each dependent child. The bill authorizes the Department of Revenue to consult with the State Department of Education regarding enrollment status, and requires the Department of Revenue to prepare and submit an annual report to the Legislature. The Department of Revenue would provide an eligible taxpayer the opportunity to either claim the credit in advance during the tax year or claim the credit on their income tax forms. The bill would take effect from and after publication in the Kansas Register, and I would be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Amelia. Committee, any questions? Senator Reddy and then Senator Holland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to know, was there a fiscal note with this? I didn't see, I think it might be in here, sorry. I didn't see it on the online when they had the bill up.
I think it's in your packet.
Is it okay? Thank you.
Senator Holland.
I think I just had a quick question. Is this pretty much the same bill the committee heard last year? Is this pre-amendments or post? I guess what I'm trying to figure out is specifically, is the tax credit fully refundable or not?
The first part of your question regarding regarding the bill you heard last year, I would have to pull it up and look at it to really identify the specific differences. But this particular bill before you today is a refundable credit.
So fully refundable. Okay, thank you.
That is a difference between the 2 years, yeah. And I do not see the fiscal note either, so we'll, okay, thank you. It should be in your packet. Senator Corson.
Just a quick question. For purposes of this statute, are homeschool students, would they be considered enrolled in a non-accredited private school? Is that where homeschoolers would fall, or are they included in this legislation?
Generally, if the homeschool is not an accredited private school, then yes, they would fall within the non-accredited private school category.
Any other, Senator Peck?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I heard you say something about the tax credit can be taken prior to the start of the school year? Or could I get you to back up? I was sort of reading the bill and listening to you, and men can't do two things at once, so I thought, well, I'll just try to do one at a time here.
There is a provision in this bill language. I believe it is subsection D, that provides that the Department of Revenue would provide an eligible taxpayer the opportunity to claim the credit, either the opportunity to claim it in advance for the tax year or to claim it on their annual income tax forms. So that provision is in there.
So I guess I'm wondering, Madam Chairman, if they claim it ahead of time and then end up sending the child to a public school, do we have recourse for recapturing the funds?
There is not language in this particular draft, in this bill, to address that at this point.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Committee, any other questions? And the fiscal note is in there. It's has Kansas as the top, March 6th. It is in your packet. And I want to thank John really quickly for putting this packet together. It was a lot of work, especially since our printer was out of ink. He got a lot of steps in going down the hall. So any other questions for Amelia? Thank you, Amelia. Our first conferee is James Franco. Welcome to the Tax Committee.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you. You have my written remarks in front of you, of course, and I will try to be as brief as I can, but I will do so by starting with a story. Back in the 1970s, my family moved from Kansas City, Missouri to southern Johnson County to attend public schools in the Blue Valley School District when it was time for my brothers to begin their academic career. And the point of that is not just my personal anecdote, but it is to bring home the point that we have school choice in Kansas for the families that can afford it. But not everybody can afford to move to a district that better suits their needs, or even if they do, they might not be able to find the right educational services that they need in many of our high-performing public schools in this state. And the bill before you today is an attempt to put that dream, that opportunity within the hands of more people and more families in Kansas. And everybody in this room, indeed everybody in this building, understands that our achievement is not where it should be. We may disagree on how we get it better when it comes to student achievement in this state, but achievement is stubbornly flat, and the gaps between high-income kids, or excuse me, just low-income children and their not low-income peers are really quite staggering as well. Much of that data from government sources is in my written remarks. Also in there are polling data that we have that shows broad bipartisan and geographic support for the idea of school choice. And the question before all of us today is whether or not this bill empowers parents, whether or not we trust them to make good decisions on behalf of their individual kids, because they're the ones who put them to bed at night, they're the ones who get them up in the morning. Not every family has had the same opportunities that many of us in this room have had, but I've yet to meet a parent who doesn't care as much as any of us do for our children, for their own children. And we should be empowering those families with this kind of an opportunity to give them the chance to find the right fit for their kid, whether that is in a high-performing public school, whether it's in a private school, a micro school, a homeschool, whatever it is. This bill ultimately is about whether or not we trust parents to act on their kids' best interests. Thank you.
Thank you. Committee, any questions? Senator Holland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sir, thank you for being here today. So let me just put the question to you directly. Do you think it is a core mission for the state of Kansas to provide a quality public education for every child in this state?
I think it is incumbent upon the state to provide a good education for every student in the state, or for every child in the state, whether that is, again, in a public institution, whether it is in a private institution or any other kind of institution that we've seen flourish, not just since the pandemic, but even before that.
Okay, so I guess what I'm saying is and we know the state, obviously through its tax collections, we spend a lot of money each year to provide what we hope is a quality educational experience for every child. Is it appropriate, or why should the state take on the burden of, in essence, funding private opportunities when it's already providing a public education for every child?
Because I think the data, two things. I think the data clearly show that that one system does not work equally well for every child. We all have kids of our own or stories where even with the best of intentions from families and teachers and everybody who wakes up every day to educate that child, it just doesn't work. And secondly, and I'm not an attorney, so forgive me if I get a little bit out over my waders here, is the state constitution says we shall provide for the educational interests of the state. And yes, that it also includes language about public education, but if the educational interests of the state focus on opportunity and achievement for those kids, to my mind, the importance is finding that child the right opportunity, regardless of whether or not it is in a public or a private institution.
Okay, so just a final question then, I guess, to kind of drive my concern home with this bill. You know, we have, say, local police forces and things that are publicly funded. If a group of citizens decided they want to, in fact, have their own private police force, and they wanted to be able to, in essence, pay for it by getting tax credits, Why would the state of Kansas let them do that when they're already basically funding a local police force to protect those groups of citizens?
That is a good question. To my mind, I think it might be primarily because public safety is a different kind of a good. It is consumed by a community, not by an individual. So whether or not little Jimmy Franco goes to USD 259 or a private school is something that is incumbent upon me as that student or as that family, whereas the idea of community policing protects my neighborhood, my town, my county, what have you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here. Appreciate your testimony. To follow up on Senator Holland's question, if the government is to provide for the safety of its citizens, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so we're to provide safety in those services. If the police department or fire department or whatever those community services are, only were effective in providing those safety services, hypothetically, 30% of the time, and the private citizens decide that they want to find a service that better meets their needs, and they got a tax credit for doing so without taking any money away from the public fire or police department, do you think that would be appropriate?
I think it would. And we also see this in, especially in, Western states where you have, wildfire and things like this. You have,
I'm going to have to bring you back onto the bill.
No,
We've
no,
got
that's fine.
Several conferees here.
okay, it is about people do things all the time to supplement what is happening in government. And this happens in fire safety in the western parts of the state and whatnot. So getting back to this same question, I think it would be entirely relevant.
Thank you. Senator Peck.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I appreciate, Mr. Franco, you appearing before the committee, and I like this bill from what I know about it so far. As a product of a private school, it would not be who I am without the private school. My question to you is this modeled after any other state? Because there are a lot of states that have a variety of school choice measures, but to your knowledge, is this modeled after any other state?
I do not know if it is modeled after any other state. I know that Oklahoma was the first state to initiate an income tax credit of this sort. I think some of the other conferees may be better able to speak to that as far as how closely it mirrors that bill specifically, but not just this. I mean, we now have dozens of states around the country that have one form of educational choice or another.
Any other questions, committee? Thank you. Shannon Pauls, welcome to the Tax Committee. I'm not used to Pauls.
Me neither yet. Good morning, committee. Madam Chair, members of the committee, my name is Shannon Pauls, and I am with Yes Every Kid. We're here today to express our support for Senate Bill 509, which establishes the education tax credit. I know you have my written testimony in front of you, so I'll just cover a couple highlights from that. The reason we support this legislation is because we know every single kid is unique. Therefore, a one-size-fits-all system does not work for every child, and therefore families who know their kids the best should be the ones in the driver's seat of their kids' education. I would like to highlight that individual education tax credits like the one you have before you today are extremely popular. A recent poll conducted by YouGov found that 2/3 of the general public and 80% of parents of K-12 students support personal education tax credits, and 2/3 of parents believe, believe that they will improve education in our country. And so these policies can be very simple for states to implement because they already utilize the existing tax mechanisms. So last year, like we just talked about, Oklahoma passed similar legislation, which was the largest and most expansive education tax credit program to date. And in just the first 2.5 days of the open application period, we saw 30,000 applications come in, just showing the demand for this program in Oklahoma. And as a policy, these tax credits are not a new idea. The federal child tax credit, for instance, is broadly popular across the nation, and about 1/3 of parents use it on education expenses today. And last year, 8 states passed legislation to create universal education freedom, and more states are set to do so this year. And this momentum is truly driven by families' desire to control and to be able to decide, where and how their children are educated. So whether that's public, private, homeschool, or a combination of those, we believe families should be in the driver's seat. And so for these reasons, we ask for your support of this legislation, and happy to stand for questions.
Any questions, committee? Senator Peck.
Madam Chairman, just very briefly, the recent poll that you mentioned at YouGov, is that fairly easy to find on?
And I can send that to you so you have that.
Okay, or possibly, or
Actually, could you send it to John and he'll
Yeah,
distribute it to the
of course.
committee? Okay, great. And also, is Oklahoma's program refundable?
It is.
Okay,
It's universal and refundable.
okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Committee, next conferee is Elizabeth Patton. I think we have a substitute.
I think you do.
Welcome to the Tax Committee.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, my name is Michael Austin. I'm the Legislative Director for Americans for Prosperity. I do apologize in advance for Elizabeth Patton, our State Director, not being here. I do feel like this is deja vu. I think I've done this before. But we are proud to stand here for Senate Bill 509 in support of the education tax credit. You've heard, of course, many conferees speak on this subject, talking about the state of our schools, talking about the need to give parents choice. And one thing I wanted most certainly to take away from our conversation today is that school systems, as we all know, have now become increasingly bureaucratic and increasingly centralized. We have all seen the stats, we've all seen the data about how much money is being spent in the public school system, and we're not really seeing that bang for the buck. How do we deal with that? How do we deal with this unfortunate increasing political problem where we have more and more administrators in our school system and we're not really seeing improving test scores, or we're seeing more issues of violence or disciplinary issues happening in schools, and it seems like parents do not have any way out. The only solution, I think, is to give parents more control, more power of their child's schooling. It is the only way, I honestly think, to provide more competition and quality in those schools. Not only that, but this is not an entirely new concept. We all understand how competition, or giving parents, at least people, more choices can lead to better outcomes. Not only that, but the concept that is behind Senate Bill 509 is the same concept that was behind the GI Bill after World War II for returning veterans. For those who came home, they got a certain amount of money that they could use to go to any school that they chose to, and there was never a decrease in quality. It never created a mess, even though I'm sure you'll probably have conferees coming up here saying that giving parents more choice will create that mess. It has not happened in the past. It will not happen now. So with that being said, I will leave the remaining time up for any questions or concerns, but I thank you for having me here today.
Questions, committee? Thank you, Michael. Committee, I would draw your attention to, we do have one WebEx. Dr. Della, I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce your last name. Welcome to the Tax Committee. What's your name?
Good morning. I'm Dr. Delia Shropshire.
Shropshire, okay.
Madam Chair Tyson and members of the Senate Assessment and Taxation Committee, thank you for this opportunity to testify in favor of the bill. I've tried to start the video. Let me see if I can get that started. Can you see me now? Okay.
Yeah.
I serve as, you have my written testimony before you. I serve as the president of Holy Savior Catholic Academy in Wichita, Kansas. And our school is a pre-K through 8th grade school. And we're in the urban northeast community of Wichita. Approximately 80% of our students are low income, free lunch eligible, free and reduced lunch eligible, and 75% of our students are of other faith traditions. So they are not Catholic. I'm gonna tell you a little bit about our school and why we support the educational choice measures like SB 509. Our parents in our school shares the conviction that every child deserves an opportunity to learn in an environment that meets their needs, that matches their needs. and where they can become the very best version of themselves. And sometimes that environment is a public school. It's a conventional public school with dedicated staff. And we support that choice, and we strongly believe in public schools. But there are opportunities and other reasons why Holy Savior parents have decided that their assigned public school wasn't the right fit for their child, and they are looking for another choice. And so they hear about Holy Savior from their friends and family, and they seek us out and often decide to enroll their children with us. And so we don't believe that it's a silver bullet in educational choice, but we do know that we just like to provide an alternative opportunity for our students and for their families. Oftentimes we have families who come who feel like they have just not been successful, and there's been heard sometimes in the community that we are the opportunity for people who are kind of at their wits' end. And so we bring those children into our school. We invest in those kids around our community and around our parish. We have done a lot of work with the Adverse Child Experience Study, and we know that through that, children who live in trauma experience more stress than other children. And so that stress adversely affects the frontal lobe and the opportunity to learn. And students need a positive one-on-one adult relationship in order to help to repair the damage in the frontal lobe. And we just try to offer those opportunities where we can build relationships with students so they can learn. And because of the opportunities provided at Holy Savior, we've been successful with that. Not saying that that opportunity isn't in a public school, but in our environment and setting, we do have a smaller, close-knit community where we can do a lot of wraparound services and deal with students in a closer setting. And so that works for those particular students. It may not work for everybody. And so we do not believe that it's public versus private. We believe that it's both and. Thank you for the opportunity for testifying today. And again, you have my written testimony. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to hear them at this time.
Thank you. Committee, any questions? Senator Holland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Doctor, thank you so much for your testimony. Just a couple questions. Holy Savior Catholic, is that a for-profit or is that a nonprofit entity?
It's nonprofit.
And right now, are you currently charging your students anything to attend your classes? Is it like maybe some sort of whatever you think they can afford based upon limited income resources? How does your financing structure work for your educational services?
We have a sliding fee scale. We meet with families and see what their income level is. We do raise money through our development to help support education. We do not charge any family the full cost of education, which is about $7,000. No family pays that amount. We subsidize that through our development efforts.
Okay, and just a final question then, as far as if this tax credit were to go through, I'm just curious, hypothetically, would this be an opportunity for you to raise your fees for those kids attending your academy?
We haven't raised our fees in 20 years.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Senator Reddy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your testimony this morning. I just wanted to know where can I go on your website to see any type of assessment scores or how your students are doing?
We are linked into our state assessment scores. I think we developed that some time ago. And so we are also listed in the state. And so you can go to the state assessment scores, or you can go into our website and then connect to the state assessment scores, either way.
Thank you.
Any other questions on the bill? Thank you, committee. I would draw your attention to the written testimony of proponents. We do have opponent testimony. Leah Filter, welcome to the Tax Committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm Leah Fleiter, Assistant Executive Director for the Kansas Association of School Boards, appearing today in opposition to Senate Bill 509. You have my testimony in front of you, so I won't read it. But what we would like to share today is that no matter what it's called, any scheme to divert tax dollars from public schools is a voucher, and vouchers offend Kansas values. We should not support forcing Kansas taxpayers to subsidize tuition for existing private school students through vouchers, and we shouldn't support vouchers for unaccredited schools with no accountability. In unaccredited schools, we have no way to know if students are learning. No background checks are required. There's no oversight by KSDE or any other organization. And there are no requirements for unaccredited schools to report student abuse or neglect. Vouchers for unaccredited schools hurt small towns. When a rural school closes, the town loses its mascot, its teachers, and a major employer. Vouchers for unaccredited schools invite fraud. In Arizona, vouchers for unaccredited schools have been abused to buy theme park tickets, kayaks, $750 espresso machines, $500 Lego sets, and more. Kansas tax dollars should not be wasted on similar fraudulent purposes, but SB 509 does nothing to prevent such fraud. In Indiana and Ohio, vouchers for unaccredited schools caused worse learning loss than the COVID pandemic. In Louisiana, vouchers caused a worse learning loss than Hurricane Katrina. And in all cases in those states, low-income students and students of color suffered the worst learning loss from vouchers. In 2023, a record high 90% of Kansas seniors graduated from public high schools. In 2022 and 23, Kansas high school students earned 5,590 professional credentials. That's a 128% increase since 2009. And Kansas public school students often perform as well or better than their private school counterparts on state assessments. Kansas public schools are the lifeblood of our smallest towns and our largest cities. Unfortunately, Senate Bill, I'm wrapping up.
You're reading your testimony.
No, I'm not.
Okay, thank you.
Unfortunately, Senate Bill 509 puts those schools, students, and towns at risk by diverting tax dollars to unaccountable schools. Thank you, and I'll stand for questions.
Thank you. I just thought you said you weren't going to read your testimony, and I'm following it.
I
word
did
for
copy and
word here.
paste a little bit.
Yeah,
You're right.
so I appreciate it, but we do need to be brief. We have so many test conferees. Committee, any questions? Senator Peck, and I do have one too, and then Senator Baumgardner.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. You said more than once that this would divert tax dollars from public education. I don't see how in 509 that would happen. Could you enlighten me and the committee?
Income tax goes to the general fund, which supports public services such as public schools and other services.
So, but public schools would not see a reduction in the base state aid or the weightings or anything, correct?
Well, if students are not in the public schools, then they are not generating the FTE for the base.
So the KASB does not support allowing parents to determine what's best for their children's educational?
No, so that's not what I said.
What did you say?
I said that we don't support diverting tax funds away from public schools.
I'm not going to argue, Madam Chairman, but this does not divert tax funds away from public schools.
That's fine. We'll debate the bill later. Senator Baumgardner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Leah, you've testified in Senate Education. You have to stop saying that public or private school teachers are not mandated to report abuse, because the Secretary of DCF and KDADS has on record, not only in the Child Welfare Oversight Committee, but in Public Health, has testified that every teacher, regardless of public, private, accredited, non-accredited, every teacher is a mandated reporter. So you have to stop saying that, because in the state of Kansas and all other states, if you are a teacher, regardless of the institution, you are a mandated reporter.
Madam Chair, thank you. Respectfully, I would note I have not been privy to that testimony. If that is indeed the case, that homeschool parents and/or teachers for unaccredited schools are indeed required to be mandatory reporters, perhaps that should be
All teachers
clarified in this
are
bill.
mandated reporters.
Thank you for the clarification. You also made a comment about wasteful spending, and I can give you a few examples in the public schools. There was some musical equipment, thousands of dollars in Johnson County for a piano. In Bourbon County, $2,000 for whiteboards that could screen in every single classroom. They put 2 of them in there, and they could have used projectors. We're not debating the bill. I just want to point out that there's waste everywhere that we can do better. So, any other questions, committee? Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your testimony. To follow up on Madam Chair's question, is it your testimony that there isn't? I saw your response to the chair's question. Is it your testimony that there isn't any waste or inappropriate spending in our public school system?
Well, Madam Chair, there are, and Senator, as you know, there are 286 districts in the state. The spending is generally approved by the local board in cooperation with the local taxpayers. I know in the case of the piano, that was at a performing arts school, and so that was a piano at a performing arts school for students who are going on to professional careers in music. I can't comment on the whiteboards, but I would, if those are the only 2 things we can think of.
No, we can give you a
All right,
list.
well,
In fact, I can
I
give
think
you a
we're-
superintendent that was removed from his position because he was using his credit card for personal purchases. So we do have issues that we need to take care of.
Real
Senator
quickly,
Erickson,
Madam Chair.
and I need to get back on the bill,
I
and
believe, I
apologize.
agree, Madam Chair, and I just want to point out, I believe you were in Senate Education testimony when we heard the last 2 audits on at-risk funding and how that has been completely abused on LPA audits. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, and thank you. No, if you can respond.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that's very strong language to say that what you said about the at-risk funding. School districts have been spending at-risk funding as they were directed by KSDE.
So I would encourage you to go look at the audit. The audit did point out.
I have seen it. Thank you. Anything else for me?
No, but thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, and thank you for your patience. Well, next conferee is Dina Horst, and welcome to the Tax Committee. It's nice to see you.
Chair Tyson and committee members, thank you for the opportunity to testify in opposition to Senate Bill 509. I'm basically going to point out concerns that we have and also ask some questions. We wonder why the bill allows the Department of Revenue to contact the Department of Education to find out if a child is enrolled in public school, but there's no allowance for the department to contact the non-public school to determine if the child is attending a non-public school. We know that in the bill, it talks about what would happen if there's fraudulent claims for tax credits. But we wonder if there's enough, oh goodness. Anyway, we wonder if my computer just went crazy. Now we'll see. Probably my fault. Anyway, we wonder if you have enough checks and balances there because what we've read about in Arizona, there were ghost students and that were claimed, and that seems to be because of a lack of auditing and that type of thing. So we would hope you deal with that issue. When we talk about tax credits, my experience is that usually it benefits a charity or unrelated individuals, animals, et cetera. But this is a concept where a taxpayer and their family personally benefit. The title alludes to a tax credit for education expenses, but there's no list of acceptable education expenses that are provided. The fiscal costs for the bill will result in less funds available for general fund obligations. When Arizona allowed every child to access vouchers, they estimate that it's going to cost them an additional $295 million because over 71% of the students that were granted vouchers weren't attending public schools. Our concerns, however, extend beyond potential funding loss. It seems like there's two systems funded by tax dollars that are set up by this bill. Public schools have many requirements that have been imposed by the courts and legislators because they're funded by tax dollars. Non-public schools have escaped that oversight by not being funded by tax dollars. Because of that fact, we have several more questions. If the non-public school accepts students whose parents have received tax credits so they can pay the tuition, will they now be required to serve that student regardless of possible learning or behavior issues? Also, if both parents of a non-public school student are taxpayers who file separately, will both be able to claim tax credits? The bill doesn't speak to that. It also does not speak to the possibility that the student has qualified for a tax credit scholarship and accepts this financial assistance option. Will the parents of that student still qualify for a tax credit? And if they do receive that tax credit scholarship, how does that affect the amount of the tax credit? Is there a length of time the child must attend the private school to qualify for a tax credit, or can they walk in for a couple of weeks, couple of months, and go back to the public school and still acquire a tax credit? We believe that tax dollars should only be used to fund public schools because they are the only schools that are required to accept every child, whether they struggle or succeed with ease, whether they have special needs or gifted, whether they have experienced trauma or not, and so forth. The state board also has a position of not supporting tax dollars being sent to non-public schools, so that also drives our opposition to this concept. We thank you again for allowing us to share our thoughts and concerns regarding Senate Bill 509. And I'd be happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Dina. Committee questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
So committee, I'm sorry, Senator Blasey does have a question.
Madam Chair, thank you. I do have a question. In your testimony here on the second page, you talk about how public schools have countless requirements that have been imposed by the courts and legislators because they are funded by tax dollars. I'm curious then, the department refused to show up to the, or I should say the school board and the commissioner refused to show up to the education committee to answer for why the department continuously for years have knowingly advised school districts in violation of the law on at-risk funding. Over $400 million is spent on kids, and yet you're talking about how you have rules, but yet you're not even applying those rules. The district is not applying those rules.
We had, it's going to sound like an excuse. We in the state board rely on the staff to the state board of the State Department to help us out there. And it's probably some of our fault because we didn't realize that they weren't monitoring that in the way they should have.
Well,
So
I believe
as a now 12-year member, I'll take at least some responsibility for that.
I appreciate that because I do believe the board is accountable for that because the audit in 2019 found that the misuse of those funds, and then again last year found that it was misused, and the board did not correct that. And so our school districts are left by themselves trying to figure out how to spend this money appropriately so the kids who are at risk are getting the services that they deserve. And that is why I think it's just not right for you to say all these requirements have been put on you, but you're not even following the requirements that have been placed by law.
I think you point out that we need to be more aware of what staff is or is not doing. So we're trying to right that issue.
So committee, we are out of time and we do have other conferees. So I'm going to ask really quickly and then we have more questions for you. If the conferees, Jim Carlskin, Jennifer Laporte, Liz Merritt, and Lynn Rogers, the Honorable Lynn Rogers, would you be able to come back tomorrow? Would you be able to, via WebEx, testify? Could you testify online then? We are out of time. I wish we would have had different order. Senator Erickson has another question, but we will continue the hearing tomorrow.
And I might say, if anyone has questions, I'm usually in the building, so you can hunt me up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just quickly to follow up on Senator Blasey's question, I know you addressed that particular instance, but at the last State Board of Education meeting, there was discussion at the board table about willfully and knowingly not following state statute. In specific regard to teacher licensure and some of the issues that we have bills before us in the legislature, my question is, when the state board talks about willfully ignoring state statute and says, by the way, if they want to sue us, let's have at it, what message do you think that sends to your staff in the seriousness of helping school districts follow state law and board directive?
Well, and I don't believe it was me making that comment. Am I correct? I don't recall making it. But
remember the conversation, though, of at the board table, that being the sentiment and comment.
I do know that it was made. And I would agree that's particularly since it's also online, that's probably not a proper time to make comments like that.
So thank you, Dina. We are out of time. I'm sorry, committee. I told the budget committee I would be out of the room today. We will continue the hearing tomorrow. Out of respect, would you like to say a couple of words? Okay, that would be great. Thank you for being here today. Thank you. Committee, we will continue the hearing tomorrow. We'll also have the hearing on 507 and then as scheduled tomorrow. When I made the bill request on 3420 RS, it was It was for Mike Burns. I just want that clear for the record, making that request for Mike Burns. So committee, is there any other business to be brought before us?
Madam Chair, I'm sorry, I'm virtual conferee. Is that something that we would have the opportunity to do tomorrow as well?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. No other business? We're adjourned.